So welcome back, everybody. This week we're going to talk with our BrainFitLife coach, Zoe Davis, who's just amazing. And she has a master's degree from Antioch University in Seattle, has worked with people who have eating disorders. But what's really more important to us is she's our coach for Amen Clinics, especially on our online program, BrainFitLife. And I get to watch all the questions people ask on BrainFitLife, and I just love how she answers them. So anybody knows the Amen Clinics method really well, it is Zoe. And Zoe and I did a very fun project with Satori Capital in Dallas, Texas, where the whole company embraced brain health for a year. And as part of it, I lectured to them, and all of them had individual appointments with Zoe. And they actually found that to be incredibly valuable to them. And so this week's podcast, we're going to talk about food and mood, food in your mind. We're going to talk about gut health. And it's like, why does psychiatric clinics care about gut health? Because it's completely connected to your brain. And then we're going to get super practical on what should you eat every day. So welcome. Such a joy to be with you, Zoe.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's start by talking about what's your favorite story in working at Amen Clinics? You actually work in our Walnut Creek Clinic in Northern California, but you have a lot of great contact with our folks online.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many good stories. I love working with folks who are really at the end of the rope in terms of feeling frustrated by lack of help or lack of feeling better. And the model that we offer, the biopsychosocial spiritual model, really embraces someone's whole self, right? So when we start talking to patients about how we can help them differently, it renews hope. It renews a sense that there's something they can do, and there's a lot. And so, lots of stories. I can think of one off the top of my head of a woman who was really struggling with depression and anxiety. She had been for much of her life and had been through every diet program you can go through because she struggled with weight as well. And we started talking about nourishment on a really broad scale. How can she feed her brain well so that her mood is better? How can she feed her body so her weight, moderates? And she really started to change her relationship with food. She started to change her relationship with herself and really started addressing, the poor nutrition through her food, but also through relationships that weren't serving her. And she really started to transform. And so her body, her weight started to, come to a normal point. She started to feel less depressed. She started to feel more motivated. And those kind of stories, again, where we're always going back to the whole person and really treating the whole person and seeing the whole person, I think has so much value, whether we're specifically in a nutrition visit or a coaching visit. That's the mindset that we have, and it really serves the whole person. So I love those kind of stories where all of the pieces come together and someone begins to be able to transform because they're not just, in a diet group, or they're not just in a, getting a psychiatric medication for depression, but they're looking at their whole life, and we can really hold that space and help them to do transformative work. So
I love that story. It's why we do what we do, right? It's the stories that keep us motivated every day. And
absolutely.
One of my favorite stories, thinking about food and your mind, is we saw a guy named Jeff who had been depressed for 30 years and even had ECT and 3 suicide attempts, and no one had ever talked to him about his diet. It's like nuts.
Yeah.
But there's a brand new study out that I read on BBC that said medical doctors get virtually no training on nutrition,
Right.
which,
Yeah.
it seems like the pharmaceutical companies have hijacked medicine, and you get a lot of pharmacology, but the best pharmacology is actually pharmacology from, it's healthy food. So
Absolutely.
Jeff came
Yeah.
to see us, and one of the things I often do is put people on an elimination diet. It's
Mhm.
let's just get rid of things that are controversial that might hurt you. So gluten, dairy, corn, soy, sugar, and artificial dyes and preservatives. And a lot of
Yeah.
people get freaked out. It's like, oh, there's nothing to eat. And I'm like, no, there's 10,000 things to
Yeah.
eat. God
Yeah.
gave you a big brain for a reason. Stop acting
Right.
like you're
Right.
four. um, and
Yeah.
within 3 days, he's better. And it's amazing.
Wow.
Three
Yeah.
days, he's better.
3 days. Yeah.
And so we started to add things back one at a time and added back gluten. Not one thing happened. He's still better.
Yeah.
Added back
Yeah.
dairy. Not one thing happened. He's better.
Yeah.
Added back corn. He said within 20 minutes he had the image of a gun in his mouth, wanting to
Yes.
shoot
Oh
himself.
my gosh. Yeah,
So,
I've had a similar experience with someone with corn as a trigger in the elimination diet. I mean, it's fascinating. I think when you're motivated, because your symptoms are so bad or so impactful to your life, which is a lot of what we see in the clinic. People are motivated to do what it takes, and emphasizing what you want to be eating as opposed to only what you want to, get rid of, can really help people to feel like there is a wide variety, because whole foods, there's tons of them, right? There's tons of different kinds of vegetables, low sugar fruits, healthy fats, high quality proteins. I mean, these are, for the most part, we've got access to that. And so emphasizing, what you can really be eating in a day to use food as medicine is a really different, frame of thinking for a lot of people, because we think of standard American diet, right? It's all about taste and convenience and what's quick, and it's not thinking about how is this food actually going to nourish me? How am I going to be fueled by this? How am I going to either prevent symptoms or disease, or how am I going to heal from things that are going on currently? And that's a real different way of thinking about it. And for a lot of people, just having that language of saying, let's talk about how we can use food as medicine, which is how I like to speak about it, it changes it for people, because it's not, it's not the way that we normally think about food. We just don't. And to your point, exactly, in medical school, you're not necessarily taught how to tell people what to eat, even if you're a GI specialist, right? It's not happening.
and when you think of the standard American diet, so I always love the acronym for that, SAD. It's
Really sad.
associated with so many mental health problems,
Mhm.
from depression, dementia, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder. And one of the things that got me really interested in diet is, I think one of my big gifts is I listen to my patients. And when they get better, I at least think about it rather than dismiss it. And so one of my patients told me her arthritis went away when she got rid of NutraSweet or aspartame.
Right.
And at 35, I was 35 at the time, I had arthritis. My knees hurt, my hands hurt, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm getting old. And now that I'm 63, I'm like, well, that's sort of silly.
Young to
and
get old, yeah.
and so I was drinking Diet Coke like it was my best friend.
Yeah.
At lunch, I'd go through Jack in the Box, get a 32-ounce Diet Coke. It's horrifying now that I
Yes,
think about
right,
it.
right.
And so I stopped it, and my arthritis went away. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm like, no. So I would test it. And within
Right.
20 minutes, my hands would start to hurt. And so I'm
Yes.
like, I'm paying attention to this. And then one of my autistic kids, his mom heard about an elimination diet And when she got rid of gluten and dairy, he picked up 100 new words in a month. And so I'm like, maybe I should pay attention to this.
Absolutely. It can be that powerful. It really can. And you think about, you know, not only what are you taking away, but when you're replacing that with nutrient dense foods, you're getting all these nutrients that you probably weren't getting before in the standard American diet, right? I mean, we're notoriously low in some key vitamins, right? Vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin C, we're not magnesium, we're not getting these in the standard American diet. So it's, yes, you're removing these toxins virtually, essentially, and then you're also replacing them with these nutrient dense foods. So, the nutrients, as Dr. Kidd, one of our peers talks about, these are not optional, right? These are nutrients that our brain requires for functioning, right? Our body requires. And so, we're resilient, we're able to get by for so long, but eventually things start to break down when we're not getting what we need in our, daily lives through food. And it can be so powerful when you start to make those changes. I've had a lot of aspartame stories, so you just reminded me of that. A lot of patients there, I'm like, let's get you off of that. Let's stop.
And it's in
this,
everything. And now chewing gum, for example, they don't put the ingredients on the label.
Right.
And how they get away with that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
But it's virtually in everything that is processed. So reading the label is critical. And I would just say, if it's not on the label, if they don't put the ingredients on the label, don't buy it.
Right.
Because that's a sign that there's some trouble waiting for you.
Absolutely. Something's hidden. Yeah. And getting people used to reading ingredients is just a really great way to engage people with what they're putting into their bodies, because it's not something that a lot of people think about. Certainly a lot of people do, but we're slowly getting there to where people are starting to think, oh, does this matter if I take this in, and is this impacting me over time? And the other thing I think about is how, as we get older, hopefully getting older, that we're accumulating all of these things that we've eaten or not eaten throughout our lives, so that it makes sense that there's going to be issues like dementia or cognitive decline or mood issues, because we haven't been doing it. So it's accumulated over time. Our body has been able to compensate for a period, maybe not, and then eventually we've got to do something about it.
So if somebody is struggling with dementia, I think it's an emergency, because the longer that goes on, the less hope there is.
Right.
If someone's struggling with attentional problems, brain fog, pain, depression, what are some of the things you think they should start eliminating from their diet?
So the big three that we talk about immediately are gluten, sugar, and dairy. So because they're just known to be the most sort of obvious ones that people can have some benefit from removing. And that's hard to do for some people. Some people really, resist doing it. But when there's something, like you said, urgent that's going on, there's a great motivation to do that. So we talk about how to do that. How do we take those out, and what do we eat instead? And we really emphasize, again, what do we want to be eating? What are we trying to eat more of? Yes, we're removing these things, but we're not taking away the variety, because there's a lot of variety. So often people notice more immediate benefit from those three things. You can also, as you mentioned earlier, corn and soy are other two that people tend to have a response to. But But once you remove the sugar and the gluten and the dairy, you've eliminated so many processed foods, right? Because they're in so many packaged foods, they're in so many products. And so when we just talk about trying to eat whole foods and emphasize whole foods, we're already eliminating dyes and artificial flavorings and artificial sweeteners, all these things that you just don't have to think about. If there's not a label on it and you're just eating whole food, then you've eliminated a lot of those other ones that we really have to get to at some point. So I always talk to people about how do we start just eating only foods that you are in their original form as much as possible, right? So vegetables, throughout the day, how do we just have those as much as we can? Most people have, I think the average American has like 2 cups a day, and maybe the vegetables, white potato or corn or something, right? But we want to be getting more like 6 to 9 cups a day. So we can do that. We just have to eat it more regularly throughout the day. And that alone is going to benefit us hugely, right? If we're replacing that gluten, that wheat, that white flour product with more vegetables, well, we've upped our nutrient density immensely, and we're getting more fiber, we're getting more vitamins and minerals. So we're eliminating something, but we're really emphasizing the variety that we're replacing it with.
So I have a fun story. Fun might not be the right word. This guy came from Minnesota to get scanned, and the scan was not very healthy. And he said, "I want you to do one more scan on MSG." And I'd never heard of it as a problem at that time. I think it's about 15 years ago. And I'm like, "Why?" He said, "Whenever I get MSG, I get violent. And I've actually hurt my wife. And I just want to know what it does to my brain." And so we gave him a big slug of MSG and scanned him again, and it deactivated his left temporal lobe. I mean, it was so clear, which is an area of the brain that's involved in violence.
Right.
And and it was funny. My interaction with him, I said, "Well, you have 2 choices." And it was sort of tongue in cheek for me. I said, "You can stop the MSG, or I can put you on Neurontin, an anticonvulsant, and I can protect your temporal lobe." And I'm fully expecting him to say, "Okay, it's a problem, I just won't eat it." He said, "You have to give me the medicine." And I'm like, "Why?"
Wow.
And he said, "Food companies often don't have to label that MSG is there, or they'll call it natural flavorings. And if I go out to dinner and I get MSG, if I lose my temper one more time, my wife said she is divorcing me. And if she divorces me, I'll kill myself." So I'm like, "Let me give you the medicine." So we put him on the medicine and told him to hold the MSG. But if they don't have it at a certain level in food, they don't have to put it in the ingredients.
Right.
And that's why eating whole foods, as you mentioned, is so important when it comes to your mental health. And who would think that a food additive could actually cause a marital problem, which then leads to suicide?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, this is the chemistry of how we imbibe things and take food in, and then what happens to us. And the opposite can be true, right? I mean, you saffron, like the spice of good feeling, right? Where you can eat it and feel, this happiness overwhelm you. And there's research to back that up. It's actually an antidepressant, right? So it's like food is medicine, right? It's that powerful. And, as I think you always say, it's medicine or poison, right? It's like, it can go either way. So getting people to even think about that and even make that connection can be really powerful. I like talking with kids about that too. It's like, start making those connections. When you eat something, how does that make you feel? And you start that young and you get that language kind of going in the internal mind, it really helps to steer you towards certain foods or away from other foods that aren't going to make you feel good.
So
It,
important. And it's why we call this podcast The Brain Warrior's Way,
yeah,
because you're in a war for the health of your brain. Everywhere you go, someone's trying to shove bad food down your throat. And we
absolutely.
say the
Yeah.
real weapons of mass destruction are highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber, food like substances stored in plastic containers that are destroying the health of America. We can do so much better. So stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about the gut brain connection. Who knew that I should have been paying attention more to the gut lectures when I decided I was going to be a psychiatrist? Who knew? Stay with us. All right, welcome back. We are here with Zoe Davis, therapist, nutritionist. She's really the coach at Amen Clinics. When I have a patient that I want to help them with their diet, I send them to Zoe. Zoe is also the coach on BrainFitLife, our online and mobile program. You can learn about it at mybrainfitlife.com. So Zoe, in your training as someone who's interested in mental health and nutrition, when did the gut become an obvious place for us to start working on?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me personally, I think it's been a long time coming. I think I've talked about how I grew up in a very strict ballet school, and I saw in my sort of later years how people's lack of eating enough nutrients, because that was strongly encouraged, right, in sort of the ballet world, was contributing to depression, anxiety. And I didn't really think of it as a gut thing necessarily, but I started thinking, okay, there's something to this nutrition and mental health, connection. So certainly later I started to realize that there had been a lot of studies done actually back, early into the early 1900s, where people were looking at nutrients and their benefit to mental health issues, but it was sort of like thrown out and not strongly encouraged. So learning about the gut as a second brain has been, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, as it's really been understood and makes common sense, right? That what we take in, and whether it's absorbed or utilized well, or whether we're not taking in enough, really contributes to how our brain is functioning, just like it contributes to how the rest of our body's functioning, right? So this is a powerful thing. I mean, we are made up of more bacteria, right, than we are other human cells, right? So we've got trillions and trillions of bacteria in our gut, and how they're impacting the way that we function, whether we're absorbing nutrients well, whether we're getting sick, whether we're staying well, whether our immune system's functioning, whether neurotransmitters are being utilized well and absorbed. It has everything to do with it, right? So it's just the second brain that we've got housed, in our GI tract. And it's powerful when we start to look at that in terms of how it changes the way that our brain functions. And it's a wonderful conversation to keep having, because not a lot of people know about it.
So not one lecture in medical school about the gut-brain connection for me, not one
Yeah.
lecture in my residency, my psychiatric residency or my child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship, not one. And it's nuts when you think as you said, you have 100 trillion bugs in your intestinal tract, where you only have 10 trillion cells in your whole body. So you have
Right.
10 times the number of bugs, and they can be really good for you. So they can be really helpful, or they can be really hurtful. And
Right.
if you don't feed the bugs right, they won't make neurotransmitters. They won't make vitamins. They won't digest your food. They will cause this thing we call leaky gut, where um, your gut lining becomes deteriorated and you start to absorb things you shouldn't absorb in your body.
Right.
And uh,
Yeah, you start to become almost allergic to yourself, right? I mean, I think that's the thing I remember a professor once said is try not to become allergic to yourself, right? It's like that idea of you start to react to things that maybe you could normally eat, but if your intestinal lining is permeable, you're going to have problems.
Well,
Um,
and I love that term. I'd never heard that before. Become
yeah,
allergic to yourself. So that's what
yeah,
MS is.
right.
That multiple sclerosis. It's what rheumatoid arthritis is. It's what
Mhm.
lupus is. And a lot of rheumatologists or neurologists will try to drug the brain into submission without really going at what the root cause might be. And that is often gut health. And so, as I talk about brain health, I always say brain health is three things. You got to care about your brain, so fall in love with your brain, avoid anything that hurts it, and do things that help it. You just need to know the list. Well, gut health is sort of the same thing. Is you need to care about that tube that's 30 feet long, and you need to care about its health, its contents, and what are the things you can do for it that help it, and what are the things you should stop doing that hurt it. So we already began to talk about why you should love it, and people know intuitively.
Yeah.
I remember I used to get butterflies before I would speak in front
Mhm.
of an audience, and why, right? I mean, I'm anxious in my mind. How does that
Right.
affect my gut? Well, there's a
Right.
big nerve called the vagus nerve that goes between your brain and your
Right.
gut. And so it's sending signals you're unhappy, your gut will feel it. I remember when I went through a period of grief 13 years ago now. I lost somebody that I just dearly loved. My GI tract was upset for 6 months. It just wasn't working right. And I think so many people who go through grief, they experience gastric symptoms. And
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a great messenger. I mean, it's a communication tool like you were just talking about the vagus nerve, but I mean, we are more in touch with and we can feel what's going on in our gut where we can't feel what's going on in our brain, right? And so it's a great if we're willing to listen to it, it's got a lot of information for us. So, people come in and they've got all kinds of issues, constipation or IBS or, just difficulty absorbing food or they're upset stomach a lot. And yeah, as you pointed out, you get into what's going on psychologically, emotionally, and there's almost always a connection. And certainly we see the benefit of addressing those two things in concert, right? Um, and again, that speaks to sort of the nourishment overall. It's like, well, okay, yeah, if someone's going through grief or someone's got a lot of anxiety, it's going to impact the way that they're able to even take in food. Um, and certainly the way that they're able to absorb it. And so looking at those two things together is always, I think, more beneficial.
so few psychiatrists or therapists have any clue or any training on this. But if you're struggling from anxiety, depression, ADD, and addiction, it's so important to work on gut health. And so let's teach people how to do that. How do you take care of your gut? So, what are the things to do and what are the things to not do?
Right. So one of the key things to do is make sure that we're feeding the beneficial bacteria, right? So one of the ways that we can do that through our food is through eating a fiber-rich diet, right? We've got to get the prebiotics in, the food for the beneficial bacteria. We've got to be eating high fiber. So, the US population in general is like we're getting half of what we need in terms of fiber. We really need, 20, 30 grams a day. We're more like 10, 15, right? So we've got to feed the bacteria and keep the beneficial bacteria there to hold space so that we don't end up with the pathogenic bacteria taking over. So that's number one. We've got to make sure we're not taking in pesticides and even artificial sweeteners like sucralose that can act like almost like an antibiotic, right? And kill off some of our beneficial bacteria. We've got to be abstaining from taking too many antibiotics, right? I mean, that's something in the medical field are just, often doled out without a lot of thought as to the repercussions. And I'm constantly fascinated by how many people are on antibiotics. I had a patient recently who had been on antibiotics for 15 years, just every day, and had never been told to take a probiotic, had not been told to incorporate probiotic rich foods, had not been told to incorporate fiber rich foods. So, those sort of basic things really make an impact on what's able to thrive in our guts and what's able to, keep from thriving.
So prebiotics, which fiber-rich food,
Mm-hmm.
probiotics, which yes, you can take supplements, and BrainMD makes pro-brain biotics. And we made that one specifically because there were a couple of studies showing that it helps support your mood and decrease anxiety. Um, Probiotic foods, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because people think they're eating yogurt, and so they get Dannon yogurt off the grocery store shelf, and it's loaded with artificial dyes and sugar.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like, no. I mean, we're
Right.
sort of not a fan of dairy anyways, and if you're
Right.
sensitive,
Yeah.
but kimchi is loaded with healthy probiotics. I don't like kimchi. It's not for me. But I love sauerkraut, and
Yeah.
sauerkraut is loaded with probiotics. So feeding your gut healthy bacteria is so important for. And then if you've had things that destroyed your gut, like antibiotics, like chronic stress. So, chronic stress as a young person. So, I just saw someone yesterday who was molested physically, emotionally, sexually. It changed her gut health. And
Yeah.
I just know that it decreases her gut's ability to produce serotonin. It makes it more likely she's going to have leaky gut and so on. So, taking care of the emotional trauma with treatments like EMDR, a specific psychotherapy for trauma, can be really helpful. But then you have to avoid things that hurt your gut and do things that help your gut.
Right.
And you mentioned probiotics. The other thing, I'm sorry, you mentioned pesticides. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, what do pesticides do? They kill bugs. And
Right.
so that's why eating organic is really important when you can. Um, but the other thing people don't talk much about is alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife is a nurse. And why do nurses put alcohol on your skin before they give you a
To
shot?
kill bacteria,
To kill
right?
the bugs.
Right.
But yet we sort of have this idea that alcohol is a health food and that you
Mm-hmm.
should have 2 or 3 glasses of red wine a day and somehow that's good for you. It's like sets little forest fires in the gut bacteria. So I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of people are almost shamed. Like if you don't drink, you're not really a grown up.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm just not a fan. I mean, if you have
Yeah.
1 or 2 glasses a week, it's probably not a problem. If you have 1 or 2 glasses a day, according to a study from Johns Hopkins, you have a smaller brain. And
Yeah.
I would just say, when it comes to the brain, size really does matter. It's the only
Mm-hmm.
organ in your body where size matters, but your brain counts. You don't want to be shrinking your
Yeah.
brain.
And I think you bring up a good point about sort of the habit of it, right? So that people are used to having alcohol with every social occasion, just like they're used to having really, junk food. I mean, there's that sort of habit of that, in so many of our lives. And I think questioning that and talking about how can you enjoy socializing without that, or what else can you do that's health promoting, that's we're still able to enjoy each other's company. I think that's it's inclusive, right? It's like you're addressing the fact that there's a social component to it, but you're also like addressing the fact that you don't want to be hurting yourself in order to have that.
So in
Right.
the going away party in the clinic that you told me about at the break,
Yeah.
I'm hoping they don't have candy and cake
No.
and sodas and
No, it was all
alcohol.
beautiful. It was all beautiful whole foods. It was great. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and fresh fruit for dessert.
why do we celebrate
Mhm.
with foods that hurt us?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just because that's what we have been doing. And that is, we haven't thought of it as hurting us, right? We've thought of it as, oh, that's just the recipe I've always made, or that's what my mom's always done, or that's what my grandmother did, or whatever. I don't think we stop to question it. And we don't stop to question what's the real meaning of the celebration, and why would that be taken away if we just transferred the types of foods we're eating or what we're drinking with it. It really doesn't change the content of the connection.
Right.
But I think people think that it does somehow.
I mean, Thanksgiving or birthdays in my house they're celebrations, but with things that serve us rather than things that hurt us. All right, when we come back, we are going to talk about what to do, what you can eat every day. Stay with us. Welcome back. So let's get really practical. I am here with Coach Zoe Davis, who has answered, goodness, hundreds, maybe more questions on BrainFitLife. You've been doing that for a long time now, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a couple of years now.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
2.5
awesome.
years.
We have about 14,000 people in our community, and we want to create brain fit people. That's our goal. So, what are options for breakfast? Let's
Yeah.
let's start with the morning. What are
Okay.
things that are nutrient dense that taste great?
Yeah. So yeah, my favorite meal of the day. So yeah, my favorite in the morning is eggs with lots of dark leafy greens. So kale is my favorite. I know a lot of people wince at kale, but I think when you make it right, it's delicious. So using whatever vegetables you like, but lightly cooking them and then adding them to your eggs. Um, and you can do that in lots of different ways. I like, asparagus and broccoli and onions and mushroom, but always using a lot of fresh garlic. And I usually use avocado oil if I'm going to put any oil in. That's my favorite. That's my favorite breakfast. And and then other options that people really enjoy are like a protein smoothie. So sometimes people aren't hungry in the morning, or they feel like they're in a rush. They don't have time to cook eggs, even though they're super fast to cook. But smoothies are really a great option because you can put a lot of nutrient density in there. You can use a high quality plant protein powder. You can use almond milk or coconut milk as your liquid. And then you can add all kinds of deliciousness. I mean, we have great recipes,
On
for
Brain
all
Fit
sorts
Life,
of
for sure.
delicious.
And in Tana's
Yeah.
cookbooks, especially the Brain Warriors Way cookbook, there's so many shake recipes,
Yeah.
and they taste awesome.
They're
And
amazing. Yeah.
and you can hide for kids, for example. So you can hide the taste of kale or spinach, um,
And for
beets.
kids, you can put vitamins in there. You can put probiotics in there. You can totally muscle it up and have it be a really strong breakfast for
Or
kids.
our new Bright Minds powder,
Mhm.
which is,
Yeah,
so many people don't want to take capsules. I
exactly.
don't want to take 10 capsules in the morning. You can take a scoop of the powder and put it in a shake and sort of hide the
Yeah,
taste, although it tastes reasonably okay.
yeah,
But that's often my go to in the morning. And we make a super clean, super healthy protein powder, one vanilla, one chocolate, and we do it just it's a way to say, look, it can taste great and be good for you.
yeah,
You just have to
absolutely.
be thoughtful. Um,
Yeah. And that's a great, for kids, that's a great after school small meal too, because kids are always starving after school and they want something that tastes good, but you don't want them to have any junk. It's like that's a great way to have something, really tasty, slightly sweet, and really nutritious for them as well.
yeah, so it's funny. Parents give kids Oreos and a Coke, and then they expect them to concentrate.
Right.
So they give them a sugar burst. And what happens in your body is your pancreas then sees the sugar, produces insulin, and so you get a sugar spike. Oh, I feel great. And then 30 minutes later, it drops you, and your brain is now mud.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, get your homework done. What's the matter with you? Don't you
Yeah.
care? Why are you doing this to me? Which is just nuts when it's the parents
Yeah.
allowing it to happen to the child.
Right,
And
and just not being aware of it, like
it's
not
not being
not
aware.
putting those two things together, which is just, yeah, it seems like when you start talking about it, it seems like common sense. I often have that conversation with people where it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize drinking coffee at 10 o'clock at night would make my sleep disturbed, but just not putting it together. If you don't have those conversations, you don't sometimes think about it.
So drinks in the morning. That's interesting because and you've alluded to this a couple of times, is
Mhm,
what people do is what they're going to do. That the
mhm.
brain actually gets in a rut. And so so what's the healthy thing I can get at Jack in the Box? Nothing. Except
Right.
maybe iced tea probably
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
But I used to get a chicken fajita pita because it was 350 calories, so it's calorie smart and healthier than most. But the more I would allow myself to do it, the more trouble I would have not doing it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
whatever you allow yourself to do, it builds tracks in the brain. And
Mhm.
so it makes it more likely to happen. So, you
Yeah.
want to find things you love that love you back
Mhm.
and do it over and over. Because I actually think it's okay to get into a routine. Most
Mhm.
people are in a routine
Yeah,
that's
sure.
bad for them. And
Right. Right.
so, I usually cook eggs for Tana and Chloe in the morning, and
Mhm.
I'll have a couple blueberries, often throw some spinach in there as well for, get my green stuff.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the more you can find a routine you love, that
Mhm.
loves you back, then you become a brain warrior, if you will.
Absolutely. And you make that new routine really accessible and doable and realistic, right? So often people say, I don't have time to cook in the morning. I'm not, so that's why I have to have, whatever's at work or what I grab at the drive-through or whatever. But if you have, for instance, I always talk to people about having some vegetables prepped and at eye level in the refrigerator. So when you open the refrigerator, there they are in all their colorful glory and they're ready to go. So there's no excuse not to just throw them in with whatever you're eating. It's a way to just make it that much easier. So, you're right. I mean, the routine really helps. So when you go to the store, come home, prep some food so that there's no reason not to eat well. It's the excuse of, oh, I don't have time to, or I'm rushing, so I'm not going to cut up any veggies. Well, if they're right there, then it's easy to add them to whatever you're eating.
So
And I
what
think
about
that's,
so let me just, and I think I've said it on the podcast before. So this is how I tell Tana I love her every morning. I
yeah,
make her a pumpkin spice almond milk cappuccino.
yum.
So half calf coffee
Yeah.
with unsweetened almond milk, with pumpkin spice,
Mhm.
about a teaspoon of that, with a little bit of chocolate stevia. Put it in a
Mhm.
blender, frost like crazy.
Yeah.
Top it with cinnamon that has a little bit of erythritol in it, and it's just amazing. She
That
used to make it
sounds
for me
delicious.
every morning, and then she went away on a trip, and I'm like, well, who's going to make this? And she's like, you have an MD. I'm sure you can follow the
You can
directions.
figure it out. Right, right.
And so
And
she taught me how to
cinnamon.
make it. And
Yeah.
now she's so sneaky because now I make it every morning. But it's like my way of saying I love you by
Yeah.
something you love that loves you back.
Yes. Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
and that's the goal. So what about snacks?
Yeah. So yeah, great. So snacks always, easy to carry with you is what people want to know. So, raw nuts and seeds I think are a great option. I will, again, like preparation. I'm always talking about preparation. I'll get a bunch of different kinds: pumpkin seeds, walnuts, almonds, sunflower seeds. I just dump them all together, mix them up. Maybe put a little bit of dehydrated coconut, unsweetened, in there. And then when you've got it pre-portioned, you can just take it with you um, for your day. Then you've got a couple servings of really healthy fat along with some protein, between meals. That can be really simple. And again, I love the berries. It sounds like you love blueberries as well. And I will do the same thing with berries because they have great benefit. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, I'll mix them up and then take those with me as well. So having a little bit of healthy fat and protein with a little bit of good carbohydrate in the fruit can be really simple. Other options that are delicious are almond butter and celery or almond butter and apple. Really easy if you've got it again already ready to go in the morning. That makes it so much easier to take. And I'm a big fan of raw veggies, so I will bring raw veggies as well with some hummus or salsa, along with the nuts, and that's actually a really good pair as well. Really
Along with
simple whole foods.
guacamole too.
Avocado, yum.
Avocados are just amazing.
Yeah.
I guess I should disclose my father is an avocado grower. So I have
Oh,
avocados all the time. It's his way of
nice.
saying he loves me. Every time I go over there to work out, he sends me home with a bag of avocados. So I just love that. And they're so good for you. And we used to
Yeah,
think not, but 60% of the solid weight of your brain is fat. They
right.
call you a fathead, say thank you.
Yeah.
It's a critical part of what should be in our diet. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay. What about fruit?
Yeah.
So we talked
So,
about berries, and berries are good. I have every day 1 cup of frozen blueberries, and
mhm,
I like frozen blueberries better
yeah,
than non-frozen blueberries because it's sort of like candy.
it
In
is
fact,
like
I
candy.
actually say it's God's candy, and a
Yeah.
cup of frozen blueberries is 70 calories. So it's calorie smart, it's loaded with fiber and color. And so, why is the color important? It is, they're phytochemicals or
Right.
they're
Yeah.
basically plant medicines.
Right. Absolutely. And blueberries specifically, I mean, they're just like a superfood. I mean, if there is such a thing, that would definitely be one of them. And frozen, I don't know if you've heard this, but the frozen actually are better digested because they break a little bit in the freezing process. Is that something you've heard?
I haven't,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't usually eat them frozen, but I think about that sometimes. Like, I like them fresh. But yeah, I think, a couple serving, depending, of course, on what your goals are, but a couple servings a day of really, low sugar fruits, especially the berries, because you're eating the seeds as well in berries. That's great. I think we're used to these like huge bananas or huge apples or huge oranges. We don't
Or
need that
huge
much.
half of a watermelon, which
Right,
is really a
exactly.
high sugar
Yeah.
fruit, or pineapple. But there's a
Right.
difference, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but glycemic index and
Sure.
glycemic load
Yeah.
that we should
Absolutely.
talk about. But, apples, oranges, pears, if you're going to have a banana, have it greener than
Right.
brown.
And pairing it with the protein is going to help that blood sugar response, right? So you're talking about the glycemic load. So pairing it with a protein will slow that down. So it's a good idea to always. That's why I like to always eat fruit with a protein, or at least some nuts that's got some protein in it. Slow that down so that you're not getting that spike and then drop, right? That's what we're all trying to avoid.
And then for dinner and lunch, I would just tell people, think of a plate. 70% should be plant-based foods, 30% high quality protein, and mix in of those numbers healthy fat.
Right.
Yeah. But what about dessert? Since we only
Ah,
have a few minutes left, let's talk about what everybody gets unhappy about. And so BrainMD actually makes 2 chocolate bars.
oh,
We
they're
make
so good. They're
Brain
so
and
good.
Love,
Yeah.
which melts and is amazing.
It's amazing. And you just need a little piece. It's like all you're needing is, like, if you just want a little sweetness, have a little bit, really enjoy it, like savor it. You don't need even the whole bar. You can just have a little piece.
And then Brain on Joy, which is our coconut chocolate bar, which we just
Delicious.
love. And it's symbolic of there is no suffering in
Absolutely.
getting well.
Yeah.
You just got to use your brain.
And you can use that, like you said, melt it and then dip your little, berries in it, and you've got this like just luxurious dessert. But I know, Tana, and you have some great recipes in there for cookies, that are made with almond meal, and I've used those at holidays. People don't even notice the difference. It's not, it's not a loss by by eating well, for sure.
Although, the difference is if I had an Oreo, I would really want 4 or 5 of them.
Oh, sure.
If I have one of Tana's cookies, I'm happy with 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah.
The level of satisfaction
Absolutely
goes way up. Well, it's been just such a joy to be with you. Thank you for your work with Amen Clinics and with BrainFitLife and being a brain warrior with me. I'm just
My
super
pleasure.
grateful for you, and I know our community is as well. If you want to interact more with Zoe, join BrainFitLife. Zoe answers virtually all of the questions on our forum. So anytime you ask a question, usually you have an answer that day or the next day, and it's either coming for me or Zoe, and most commonly lately it's been Zoe. So thank you so much, my friend.
Absolutely. Take good care. Thank you.
All right, say hi to everybody in Walnut Creek for me. Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.